Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite comic book character of all time. That's right, old Hornhead himself, Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. And with the new MCU Disney Plus series Daredevil Born Again dropping soon, I thought this would be a great time to go ahead and prepare a fresh list. Today we're going to be talking about 10 Daredevil must-reads. These comics were all really enjoyable for me for different reasons. I've likely showcased all of these books at some point in some form in the history of this channel, but I sincerely hope you like this list. Before we jump in though, I'd just like to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, perhaps a Daredevil comic or two, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's probably the best way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's Daredevil list. Kicking off the list today in no particular order, we're going to be talking about Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's classic Daredevil Yellow. This is part of that Marvel Color series from these two incredible creators, along with Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and Captain America White. For my money, this is one of my favorite Daredevil origin-based stories, and the art from Tim Sale is absolutely timeless. What this miniseries does is really showcase what made Silver Age Daredevil a fun read. We have a nice representation of all of Daredevil's primary cast of characters, his supporting allies, villains, love interests, things like that. And again, just kind of a love letter to that Silver Age kind of storytelling, but really retooled for modern audiences. There's a level of charm to this piece that I really enjoyed. Daredevil is so grim and gritty most times, and yes, that is my favorite flavor of Daredevil as well, but sometimes it's nice to have some of that levity and some of the charm that Daredevil also has, and I think that's on full display here with Daredevil Yellow. You might have noticed as well he has his original yellow, red, and black costume. I think that that's partially where the yellow in the title comes from, and that was a really welcome thing to see. Yes, Daredevil debuted with this costume before switching over to his classic red after a few short issues. I think that this is a really fun place to start Daredevil, particularly if you're not a fan of going back to the original issues back in the 60s or whenever. If you don't want to revisit that stuff, I do think this is a good way to tip your hat at what happened during that era while still feeling like it has a modern pacing and storytelling style. I'm always going to love this story, particularly because I'm a huge fan of both of these creators. I know Tim Sale, we lost him too soon just a couple years ago, but reading his work definitely reminds me what a great artistic talent he was. And Jeph Loeb, like I said, he turns in a lot of great work as well. A huge fan of both of these creators. And Daredevil Yellow is just a great book for new readers, returning fans of the character, and it's great for people that want a good one-and-done story. It's very self-contained, and it just works well all by itself. Don't miss out on Daredevil Yellow. Next on today's list for Daredevil must-read comics, I'm going to be talking about Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky and Marco Checchetto. To do that, I have this Omnibus edition. This is the Omnibus Volume 1 of a 2-volume set that completes their run. What I love about this run is that it's a fantastic modern Daredevil run. I think it's very accessible to new readers, and I think that longtime fans will appreciate a lot of what Zdarsky and team accomplished throughout this run. It's one part street, gritty, epicness, one part kind of mystical, more interesting elements of Daredevil's lore, but I like that we have everything sandwiched together. They properly showcase so many of Daredevil's best rogues gallery of villains. We have a great supporting cast as always, some familiar faces, some new to the table, and overall it's just a fantastic ride. I do think that Zdarsky's run was a bit stronger in the first half, which is why I decided to showcase this Volume 1. The art from Marco Checchetto is also absolutely transcendent. You can see it here. It is just absolutely stunning. There are a couple other pencilers and artists on this book as well that do an admirable job, but Checchetto really dials in something epic. I know that I saw some of his Daredevil pencils in the pages of the Daredevil Shadowland era from Andy Diggle, but seeing him as the main Daredevil artist is just really fantastic. This run, I think, will go down as a much beloved run. I know it certainly is now. I'll be interested to see how time treats this run, but I think it's definitely a modern classic and one worth visiting, especially for those that want to break into the character and want something more contemporary or a run that's still talked about quite frequently. I think it still has a pretty good buzz, and it's definitely one I could give a thumbs up to. This run was also collected in trade paperbacks. I know there were a couple other oversized hardcover editions that you could see some of the run in, but these two omnibus volumes were probably my preference. If you're interested in more on this run, I did review this omnibus in full on the channel. Don't miss out on Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky and Marco Checchetto. Okay, next up on our must-read Daredevil list, this is one of my personal favorites. This is Daredevil Battlin Jack Murdock by Zeb Wells and Carmine Di Giandomenico. This was a Marvel Knights era title, and this is honestly a book I never hear talked about, and I really think that we should change that. This is one of my favorite Daredevil origin-based stories. I think it's fantastic for new readers, but I think it is an absolute gem and treasure for longer-time Daredevil fans as well. Essentially, we have an origin retelling for Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, but it really centers on his father, Battlin Jack Murdock, the kind of infamous boxer who is so intrinsically tied to Daredevil's origin story, and in this small miniseries, we get to see the narrative framed from his perspective. I really loved this because it was almost starting before the start of the story, if that makes any sense. In fact, Matt Murdock feels like a secondary character in this own kind of franchise work here. Yes, it is still about Daredevil, but it really centers on Battlin Jack, and I think that's to the strength of this title. Honestly, this is my favorite work I've read from Zeb Wells, and I've enjoyed a lot of his works in the past. Most recently, I read through Hellions, and I really enjoyed that. The artist as well, I've loved a lot of his works in the recent times, like Batman the Knight, for example, with Chip Zdarsky and him. Really enjoyed that as well. But anyway, I just think that this is a fantastic origin story. I love the glimpses of Daredevil and kind of Matt's beginnings that you get through the pages of this miniseries. Again, I really think this is underrated. I believe this particular volume has been out of print for far too long. I'm hoping we get that changed in the future. Again, just a huge fan here. In general, I think Marvel Knights has some real gems, and I'm surprised we're not seeing more of it reprinted just in general. But yeah, this one's definitely slipped under the radar, and it's one I think a lot of people should be talking about. If you're looking for a little bit more of an obscure hidden gem in the Daredevil universe, this is definitely my top pick. Of course, again, that is Daredevil Battlin Jack Murdock. Okay, next up we have another Daredevil omnibus, and this is also one of my favorite Daredevil runs, probably, well, arguably the most prolific Daredevil run of all time. This is Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. This is kind of the late 70s, 80s Daredevil run that completely redefined this hero. It took everything that came before and added more complex layers. They even retconned some of the origin, adding things like a mentor. Of course, I'm referring to the blind warrior known as Stick, adding the ninjas in the hand, creating Elektra, and so much more. This run really helped elevate Bullseye and Kingpin as center Daredevil villains, and again, just added a lot more layering to Daredevil's whole world and mythos. Frank Miller and Klaus Janson also added that kind of gritty noir aspect to Daredevil, I really feel. Not that some undertones of that didn't already exist, but really Frank Miller revolutionized this character and brought some of those darker, grittier street vigilante aspects right to the forefront. This run, again, was just one of my absolute favorites. This is considered a classic Marvel run, and with good reason. I honestly think that this single omnibus contains one of the best 70s, 80s comics of all time, and I just love it. Now when I think about Daredevil, I can't think of Daredevil without characters like Elektra, the Hand, Stick, and more. Looking through some of these pages, I'm pulled right back into the first time I read through them, back in the kind of paperback era. I had a bunch of Frank Miller paperbacks, and now to have it in this omnibus format, it's just a real treat. Whether you've revisited this run time and time again, or you're just thinking about starting it, this is a quintessential Daredevil experience and really the backbone of all modern Daredevil comic runs, at least in my opinion. When I consider my short list of Daredevil must-reads, Frank Miller is definitely near the top of that list. Next up is one of my old trusty paperbacks. This is Daredevil Guardian Devil by Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada. This is another Daredevil book that came out during that Marvel Knights era, and this is also the beginning of a fresh issue 1 for Daredevil. Most notably, this is also one of my first introductions to Daredevil. When I wanted to read kind of straight through longer runs, I started with issue 1 here in this very paperback during Kevin Smith's run, and I followed this through the kind of David Mack era, through Bendis, Brubaker, Andy Diggle, Mark Waid, just so on and so on. And pretty much since I started this, I've read near continuously, almost through current. I stopped at the end of Zdarsky. I will pick up with Saladin Ahmed at some point, I'm sure. But honestly, I read a near unbroken run after this issue here. There's maybe a couple I've missed out on, but for the most part, I've read and or collected and read everything from here. But this really relaunches Daredevil again with that issue 1. We don't have a retelling of the origin story here, but I do think that this is still a great starting point for new readers. Longer term fans will note the return of some really notable characters, probably most notably in this collection, Karen Page. A lot of really fun Daredevil and Marvel Comics shakeups occur within this run. There's aspects of kind of spiritualism as well, or at least by appearances, and we go into just a really kind of interesting thriller kind of Daredevil story. Another thing I enjoy about Guardian Devil is that it reads fairly self-contained. Like, if you get a collection that includes all the issues, it really just feels like you're reading a graphic novel. And yes, we go from here into the kind of David Mack, Joe Quesada era of Daredevil, but you can read this as a self-contained experience or as one of your first Daredevil books, and I really don't think you'd be too bad off. And that's speaking as someone who read this as one of his very first Daredevil comics. I think I read some early Silver Age before this and maybe some of the Frank Miller run, but this is definitely in that early Daredevil window. Honestly, maybe even Daredevil Yellow. Honestly, my history with this character is a little bit inexact because it's been so many years, but I definitely know that this run was near the beginning for me. And speaking of the very beginning, yes, I am going to throw back all the way to the origins of Daredevil in the Silver Age of comic books with Daredevil Omnibus Volume 1. This is an older printing of this omnibus. I'm not really sure what year this one was released. I know they've done reprints before and after this, I believe. But this contains the first couple dozen issues of Daredevil, so you get to start the character right from the very beginning. And while Daredevil is maybe not the most remarkable Silver Age Marvel title, there's definitely some really great moments in this era of Daredevil, and we also attract some really great artists at certain points. Like, I know Gene Colan eventually jumps on Daredevil in the Silver Age. He's one of my favorite kind of old school classic comic book artists. But anyway, we start with the origin of this character. We have that radioactive material that blinds him. We have him waking up with heightened senses and kind of a radar sense, and we have him just kind of becoming a vigilante. We start, of course, with his black, red, and yellow costume before he transitions to his most well-known red costume. But a lot of these early adventures are so much fun. I mean, who doesn't like the great Stan Lee, especially during this time? I don't believe this omnibus is still in print, but I know they've released other collections that include some of these issues, like Epic collections and things like that. Again, I'm not sure at the time of this recording everything that's in print, but you can still track down some of these issues or collections, or you can certainly read it digitally. Again, if you're a fan of the Silver Age, I do think that this is a fun one to pick up. It might not be at the top of my list, but I still think it's a great Daredevil reading experience, and if you want to really delve into the character, get into the roots, I do think that this is a great Daredevil book to pick up. And if you're a fan of older school comics, certainly I'd recommend it to you without a doubt. It's also really fun with a collection like this to see first appearances of not only our heroes, but some of the villains in Daredevil's universe. A really fun treat here, and an omnibus I am thoroughly happy to have in the collection. Okay, at last we've reached my favorite Daredevil run of all time. Yes, you heard me say it here. This is Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. This is, again, An amazing Daredevil run. This is the Omnibus Volume 1 of a 2-volume omnibus set that contains this entire run. We not only get the artwork from the great Alex Maleev, but most notably at the beginning of this collection, we also get art from David Mack, who also wrote and illustrated on this title immediately before this Bendis era, and then he pops back in and out. Great art there as well. But this run for me just really captures everything I love in a great Daredevil comic run. We have some great character development for Matt Murdock and Daredevil, both in and out of costume, a ton of rich secondary characters, some really sinister villains appearances, and everything just feels so organic and real and visceral. There is a gritty noir crime aspect to this whole work. This really does channel part of Bendis that I really enjoy, like the roots of Brian Michael Bendis' writing, some of his earlier stuff. You see a lot of that kind of crime comic and kind of grit to it, and this definitely has that in spades and in full display. You pair that with artists like David Mack and Alex Maleev, who was one of the main series artists throughout the Bendis run, and you really have something special here. Not only that, this is such a decisive and important point in Daredevil's history. Bendis really does shake up the status quo for our favorite horned-head hero, and I just fell in love with the character in a new way here. Again, I started around Guardian Devil and tried to read as far through as I could, but when I hit Bendis, I just knew that this cemented itself as one of my favorite characters of all time. This era, the Brubaker era that immediately follows it, it's all just really grand, and when I think about great Daredevil reads, I could not resist from putting my favorite, that's Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book based list videos like this, reviews, unboxings, shorts, and more. Thank you for considering. Now on with today's Daredevil list. Okay, next on the list today is another Marvel Knights Daredevil title. This is Daredevil Parts of a Whole by David Mack and Joe Quesada. And I have Parts of a Whole collected here in this old paperback that I actually got signed by David Mack when I met him a year ago. And wow, what a treat it was meeting him. A great guy. But yes, this is a great Daredevil run. I think a lot of people were drawn back to this particular story arc recently after the drop of the Echo miniseries on Disney+. That show revolved around the character of Echo, who was debuted in this very Daredevil arc. Without spoiling too much, essentially Echo is a character that has some unique abilities all her own that is entangled with Daredevil on multiple different levels. This storyline not only introduces this powerhouse character, but it also ignites sparks of a possible romance for our favorite horned-head hero, and it also brings in the kingpin of crime himself, Wilson Fisk, Daredevil's arch nemesis. I really love this storyline, and the art we get from Joe Quesada and even flourishes from David Mack throughout is a real treat to see. This art is so dynamic and interesting, it pops right off the page, and honestly, the storytelling itself in the written word is really compelling from page 1 all the way through the end. I am happy the Echo series recently put this arc on more people's radars again, but I still think that this is kind of an underrated gem in the world of modern Daredevil storytelling. Not only is the art dialed in, not only do we get great characters, but it's just a fantastic Daredevil story from beginning to end. And if you're a fan of the Kingpin, this is a must-read Kingpin story for so many reasons I won't spoil here. I think that this collection was included in a recently released Echo collection. I'm not sure if that paperback is still in print, but I know that it was recently, or you can probably track down older copies like this. This might be included in the Marvel Knights Omnibus as well, which has also been long out of print, but there are ways to find this run. Certainly you can read it online or track down single issues, but yeah, this is definitely one I think worth checking out. A great Daredevil story, Daredevil Parts of a Whole. Next up on this great Daredevil comics list, I have to talk about Daredevil by Mark Waid. To do that, this is the Volume 1 Omnibus of a 2-volume omnibus set. This run was also released in big, oversized hardcovers, I think maybe 5 or 6 volumes, standard size hardcovers, floppy trade paperbacks, and more. I love this run, and I'm just going to say it. Mark Waid's Daredevil is one of the best Daredevil runs, period. Full stop, bar none. While it might not be my tippy top most favorite run, run. It's easily in my top 5 favorite Daredevil readings, and I really think it holds up. I think this gets a lot of mixed reviews because some people consider this the happy-go-lucky modern Daredevil run, but I think that does it a bit of a disservice. Yes, it is brighter, it has more levity in general, but beyond that, it is a really nuanced look at the character of Matt Murdock and Daredevil, and I think to say it's just happy-go-lucky Daredevil is really doing it a disservice. It's much more complex than that, and that is a perfect treatment for this extremely complex Marvel hero. I really love it too, though, because we do have colorful moments. We do have some great supporting casts of heroes and villains showing up in this series. We not only have staple Daredevil villains, but also other Marvel villains that decide to pop in and out, which I absolutely loved. We have so many great artists attached to the Mark Waid era as well. We change hands quite often, but it all really serves kind of that singular vision and tone and voice that Mark Waid brings to the table here. I love this run as well because it feels relatively self-contained. Mark Waid has a great beginning, middle, and end point for his Daredevil run, and I think you can read it overall like an isolated ecosystem or in the midst of other great Daredevil runs. I think if you're looking for a great modern Daredevil run, Daredevil stories with a little bit of a lighter touch rather than graphic, gritty, visceral violence, this is probably the stop I would point you to and welcome you with open arms and just say this is a fantastic Daredevil run, that it might not be for everyone, but wow, is it for me, and I really enjoyed it, and it's easily amongst my list of the greatest Daredevil comics of all time. And to round out the list today, last but certainly not least, we have Daredevil by Frank Miller, the Companion Omnibus or Omnibus Companion. I own this book and I still don't know which way those words go, but yes, this is the Companion Omnibus volume that is to accompany that main Frank Miller Klaus Janson omnibus I mentioned earlier in the video. You might be asking, what makes this so great? How is it different than the other omnibus? Well, let me answer those questions for you. Unlike the Frank Miller Klaus Janson omnibus, which I mentioned earlier, which contains that main run on the Daredevil title itself, this companion omnibus includes other Frank Miller Daredevil stories. It has When He Returned to the Book, another mini-series. It includes the incredible Daredevil, The Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr., which is easily one of the best origin stories for Daredevil written of all time. All of that, and I haven't even name-dropped possibly its greatest claim to fame, and that is Daredevil Born Again. I don't want to go into too many spoilers about that story arc, but it involves the Kingpin and Daredevil's life in shambles. It's one of the most iconic Kingpin Daredevil stories of all time, and that is just the tip of the iceberg for this amazing collection. I think if you enjoy Frank Miller, if you enjoy his Daredevil run, then this book is more than just a companion, it is an essential omnibus, filled with fantastic, great, gritty Daredevil stories, and again, including one of my favorites, The Man Without Fear, which is a mini-series that just re-explores his origin. We have it incorporating elements like Stick and Elektra, which I really enjoyed. In general, just as a note, I do think The Man Without Fear, independent of this omnibus, I think that's an essential Daredevil read, and this is my way of showcasing that story specifically, but also Born Again and other great Frank Miller Daredevil goodies, all in one amazing omnibus. If this looks of interest to you, please don't miss out on picking up Daredevil by Frank Miller, Omnibus Companion. Alright, and just like that, we're going to begin to wrap up my look at 10 Daredevil must-read Marvel comics. I absolutely love this incredible crime-fighting vigilante, and this is just my short list of great books. There's so many I didn't even get to include on this list that deserve mention. Things like the Ed Brubaker run, the run by Charles Soule, and Nascenti, and just so many more. And hopefully that's where you'll come in. Did I pick some of your favorite Daredevil comic stories, or did some of your favorites fail to make my list? Let me know in the comments section. Shout out some of your favorite Daredevil comics or stories of all time. Let me know if, like me, you're excited to check out Daredevil Born Again, dropping on Disney+. Let me know all of that, or generally what you thought of this video, again in that comments section. And thank you so much for watching. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed putting this particular video together. Really such a treat. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, comment, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks, and have a good one.